The sound of horses' hooves pounding against the packed earth echoed through the valley as Abigail Winters stared out the window of her family's ranch house, the letter from her father still clutched in her trembling hands. At 20 years old, she had always known this day might come, but the reality of seeing it spelled out in her father's precise handwriting made her stomach twist into knots. "We have arranged a suitable match with Mr. Everett Blackwood, a businessman from Boston with considerable holdings in the railway. He will arrive in 2 weeks' time to formalize the engagement." Montana Territory, 1876. The western frontier was still wild and untamed, but Abigail's father, Judge Thomas Winters, was determined to bring civilization and advantageous connections to their corner of it, even if that meant trading his only daughter like cattle at auction. Abigail crumpled the letter in her fist. Her father and mother had departed for Denver 3 months ago, leaving her to manage the household with only the ranch hands and her elderly aunt for company. She had reveled in the freedom, in making decisions without constantly seeking approval. Now, with a few strokes of a pen, that freedom was being stripped away. Miss Abigail, Martha, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "There's a man at the door. Says he's here about the cattle drive." Abigail straightened her skirts and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Send him in, please." She moved to the study, her father's domain, and positioned herself behind the massive oak desk. If she was to be sold off, she would at least play the role of mistress of Winter's ranch until the bitter end. The man who entered removed his hat immediately, revealing sun-bleached hair the color of wheat. His face was tanned from endless days under the open sky, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the distance. Unlike the dandies from town who occasionally came calling, he wore no fancy vest or collar, just a simple shirt, worn denim pants, and boots caked with the dust of the trail. "Miss Winters?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from these parts originally. "Yes, and you are?" "Hank Dawson, madam. I've been hired to lead your cattle to market in Cheyenne." Abigail nodded, recalling her father mentioning arrangements for the summer drive before his departure. "Of course, Mr. Dawson. Please have a seat." Hank lowered himself into the chair opposite her, his movements cautious, as if afraid the fine furniture might break under his weight. His hands, calloused and strong, rested on his knees. "Your father said to report to him directly, but I was told in town he's away. The men are gathered, and we're ready to move the herd, but I wanted to confirm the arrangements." Abigail hesitated. Her father hadn't left specific instructions about the cattle drive, assuming he would return well before preparations began. But with the news of her impending engagement, Abigail felt a sudden urge to assert herself in this one final act of independence. "The arrangements stand, Mr. Dawson. My father trusted you with this task, and so shall I. When do you intend to depart?" "Day after tomorrow, if that suits. We need to reach Cheyenne before the first September rains." "Very well. I would like to accompany the drive." Hank's eyebrows shot up. "Begging your pardon, madam, but a cattle drive is no place for a woman?" Abigail finished for him, her chin lifting slightly. "Perhaps not, Mr. Dawson, but I am the owner's daughter and temporary mistress of this ranch. I have a responsibility to see our interests protected." Hank studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "It's dangerous, Miss Winters. Bandits, wild animals, river crossings, not to mention the discomfort. We'll be sleeping under the stars for weeks. I am no stranger to hardship, Mr. Dawson. I have ridden these lands since I was a child, and I can shoot as well as any of our ranch hands." This wasn't entirely true. She could ride well enough, but her shooting left much to be desired. Still, she lifted her chin in defiance. A small smile tugged at the corner of Hank's mouth. "Your father didn't mention you'd be joining us." "My father didn't anticipate being away so long. Nor did he anticipate," she stopped herself, unwilling to share her personal troubles with this stranger. "The decision is made, Mr. Dawson. I will accompany the drive." Hank nodded slowly, seemingly resigned. "As you wish, Miss Winters. But I need your word that you'll follow my instructions when it comes to safety. Out there, one wrong move can mean death for more than just yourself." "You have my word," Abigail promised, already wondering if she had lost her mind. But the alternative, sitting in this house, waiting for a man she had never met to claim her as his bride, was unthinkable. I'll be ready at first light, day after tomorrow." After Hank departed, Abigail paced the study, her mind racing. The impulsive decision to join the cattle drive might delay the inevitable, but it wouldn't stop it. Her father's mind, once set, was as immovable as the mountains that framed their valley. She pulled out paper and began writing to her aunt in Virginia City, explaining she would be gone for several weeks. No mention of the engagement. That was a conversation best had in person upon her return. By then, perhaps she would have found the courage to defy her father's wishes. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Abigail selected her sturdiest riding clothes, packed essential items into saddlebags, and informed the remaining household staff of her plans. Martha looked horrified but knew better than to argue with the determination in her young mistress's eyes. "At least take some proper food for the first few days," the housekeeper insisted, packing a small bundle. "That trail cooking will have you running back home before you cross the first river." Abigail smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." The night before departure, Abigail barely slept, her mind filled with doubts and second thoughts. But when she recalled the letter from her father, her resolve strengthened. She would not be traded like a commodity, not without at least one last taste of freedom. Dawn broke clear and cold, the Montana summer giving way to hints of autumn. Abigail dressed in riding breeches beneath her split skirt, scandalous by town standards, but practical for long days in the saddle. She braided her long hair tightly and tucked it under a wide-brimmed hat for protection from the sun. When she emerged from the house, the cattle drive was already forming. Nearly 2,000 head of cattle milled in the holding pens, their lowing creating a constant backdrop of noise. Cowboys moved among them, organizing the herd for the long journey ahead. Hank spotted her immediately and rode over, his expression unreadable. "Miss Winters, I see you're determined to follow through with this." "I am a woman of my word, Mr. Dawson." He nodded once, then gestured to a sturdy chestnut mare already saddled nearby. "That's Penny. She's steady and sure-footed, good for the trail ahead." Abigail approached the horse, stroking her velvety nose. "She's beautiful. She'll serve you well if you treat her right," Hank said, his voice softening slightly when speaking of the animal. "We're moving out in 10 minutes. Stay toward the middle of the column, away from the dust of the herd, but not so far back you'd be easy pickings for trouble." "I understand." As Hank rode away to oversee final preparations, Abigail mounted Penny with practiced ease. The mare responded well to her touch, and for the first time since receiving her father's letter, Abigail felt a flicker of genuine excitement. The cattle drive lurched into motion with shouts from the cowboys and the rhythmic plodding of thousands of hooves. Abigail took her place as instructed, nodding politely to the cowboys who tipped their hats as they passed. Most regarded her with curiosity, a few with open skepticism, but none voiced objections to her presence. By midday, the Winters ranch had disappeared beyond the rolling hills behind them. Ahead stretched miles of open country, beautiful, dangerous, and unknown. Abigail felt the weight of her father's expectations falling away with each mile, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. They made camp that first night in a sheltered valley beside a small stream. The cowboys worked with practiced efficiency, settling the cattle before seeing to their own needs. Abigail dismounted stiffly, her muscles already protesting the hours in the saddle despite her experience. "First day's always the hardest," came Hank's voice from behind her. He handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "It gets easier." Abigail accepted the cup gratefully. "I hope you're right. The men have set up a small area for you behind those rocks," he continued, gesturing to an outcropping nearby. "It's not much privacy, but it's the best we can do." "Thank you. I appreciate the consideration." Hank studied her for a moment. "May I ask why you're really here, Miss Winters? It can't just be about watching over your father's investment." Abigail hesitated, then decided that a partial truth was better than an outright lie. "I needed to leave the ranch for a while. Personal reasons. Running from something? Or someone?" She met his gaze steadily. "Let's just say I'm seeking clarity before making an important decision." Hank nodded, seeming to accept this. "Well, there's plenty of time for thinking out here. Too much, sometimes." He tipped his hat and moved away, leaving Abigail to set up her small camp. That night, lying on her bedroll beneath the vast canopy of stars, Abigail wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The ground was hard, insects buzzed incessantly, and distant howls reminded her of the wilderness surrounding them. Yet despite the discomfort, she felt a strange peace. Out here, she wasn't Judge Winters' daughter or Mr. Blackwood's intended bride. She was simply Abigail, making her own choices, good or bad. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Rise before dawn, breakfast of biscuits and coffee, long hours in the saddle punctuated by brief rests, then evening camp with beans, beef, and more coffee around the fire. The cowboys accepted her presence with surprising grace, even teaching her some of the basics of trail work when she expressed interest. On the 5th day, as they approached a difficult river crossing, Hank rode up beside her. "We'll be crossing the Missouri tomorrow. It's running high with the late summer rains." Abigail nodded, trying to hide her apprehension. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay back until the herd is across," he said firmly. "I'll come back for you myself. The current's tricky, and I don't want to fish you out downstream." "I'm not helpless, Mr. Dawson. Never said you were. But even experienced hands have been swept away in that river." His expression softened slightly. "It's not about you being a woman, Miss Winters. It's about keeping everyone safe." Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the front of the herd. Hank's head snapped around, and without another word, he spurred his horse forward. Abigail followed at a distance, curiosity overcoming caution. At the head of the column, several cowboys were gathered around a fallen rider. As Abigail approached, she saw it was young Billy, barely 18 and on his first drive. Blood soaked through his shirt where a horn had caught him during an unexpected cattle surge. "He needs stitching," Hank was saying, his voice calm but urgent. "Anyone here know how?" The men exchanged glances, none stepping forward. Abigail dismounted and pushed her way through. "I can do it." All eyes turned to her. Hank's expression was skeptical. "You sure about that?" "My mother taught me," Abigail explained, already kneeling beside the injured boy. "We live too far from town doctors not to know basic medicine." Hank hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Jake, get the medical kit from my saddlebag. The rest of you, back to work. These cattle won't drive themselves." As the others dispersed, Abigail examined the wound. It was deep but clean, the horn having sliced rather than punctured. Billy's face was pale with shock and pain. "You'll be all right," she assured him, accepting the medical kit from Jake. "This will hurt, but it needs to be closed." The boy nodded bravely. "Do what you gotta do, miss." Abigail worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with whiskey before threading the needle. Her hands remained steady as she placed each stitch, ignoring Billy's muffled groans and the intense gaze of Hank Dawson watching every move. When she finished, she bandaged the wound with clean cloth. "Keep it dry, and have me check it tomorrow for signs of infection." "Thank you, Miss Winters," Billy managed, his voice weak but grateful. Hank helped the boy onto a wagon that carried their supplies. "Rest for today? We'll see how you're feeling tomorrow." As they walked back to their horses, Hank cleared his throat. "That was impressive work. Where did you learn to stitch like that?" "My mother treated half the injuries in our valley before she married my father and moved to the ranch. She made sure I knew how to handle emergencies." Abigail's voice softened at the memory. "She always said a woman needed practical skills more than piano playing out here." Wise woman. Hank helped her mount Penny, his hand lingering briefly on her arm. "You've surprised me, Miss Winters. I'm beginning to think you might actually belong on this drive." The compliment, simple as it was, warmed her more than it should have. "High praise indeed, Mr. Dawson." That evening, Abigail's status among the men subtly shifted. Where before they had been politely distant, now they included her in conversations around the fire, sharing stories and asking her opinion on matters beyond medicinal skills. She found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, the weight of her impending engagement temporarily forgotten. Hank sat across the fire, his features golden in the flickering light. Occasionally, their eyes would meet, and something unspoken passed between them, a growing respect, perhaps, or something deeper that neither was ready to acknowledge. The Missouri River crossing the next day proved as challenging as Hank had warned. The water ran swift and brown with silt, its surface deceptively calm while currents churned beneath. The cowboys worked with practiced coordination, guiding the reluctant cattle into the water and preventing them from turning back or drifting downstream. True to his word, Hank returned for Abigail after the herd was safely across. He rode up on his dripping horse, water streaming from his hat and clothes. "Ready, Miss Winters? Stay close and follow exactly where I lead. That riverbed is treacherous with hidden holes." Abigail nodded, her mouth too dry for words as she stared at the expanse of water. Penny seemed equally nervous, snorting and sidestepping. "Your horse knows the danger," Hank observed. "But she's crossed rivers before. Trust her instincts, and she'll get you through." They entered the water side by side, their horses immediately struggling against the current. Abigail gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, forcing herself to breathe evenly. The water rose quickly, soon reaching the horses' bellies and then their shoulders. "Keep moving," Hank called over the rush of water. "If we stop, the current will take us." Halfway across, Penny stumbled on an unseen obstacle, lurching sideways. Abigail barely managed to stay mounted, a cry escaping her lips as water splashed up to her waist. In an instant, Hank was there, his hand gripping her arm, steadying her. "I've got you. Look at me, not the water." Abigail raised her eyes to his, finding unexpected reassurance in their steady blue depths. For a long moment, they remained connected physically by his grip on her arm, emotionally by something far more complex. "We need to keep moving," he said finally, releasing her arm but staying close. "We're more than halfway now." The remainder of the crossing passed without incident, though Abigail's heart continued to race long after they reached the opposite bank. As they rejoined the drive, now reorganizing after the crossing, Hank glanced at her with something like admiration. "You did well back there." Most first-timers panic when their horse stumbles. "I was terrified," Abigail admitted, "but I knew you wouldn't let me drown." A shadow passed over Hank's face. "I've lost men in river crossings before. It happens fast, no matter how careful you are." Abigail realized he was sharing something personal, perhaps a burden he carried. "It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I'm the trail boss. Everything that happens is my responsibility." He straightened in his saddle, visibly pushing the memory away. "We need to make up time." The crossing took longer than expected. As he rode ahead to confer with his second-in-command, Abigail watched him, seeing beyond the capable exterior to the man who carried the weight of every decision, every life under his care. It made her father's arrangement seem all the more hollow, a business transaction where Everett Blackwood would acquire a wife like purchasing a prize horse, with no consideration for the burdens they might share. That night, checking on Billy's wound in the medical wagon, Abigail found herself thinking about choices those made for her and those she might yet make for herself. The stitches were holding well, with no signs of infection. The boy would recover fully, though he'd carry the scar as a reminder of his first cattle drive. "You've got gentle hands, Miss Winters," Billy said as she rebandaged the wound. "Like my mom back home." Abigail smiled. "How old are you, Billy?" 19 come November, miss." "And you chose this life? The open trail?" He nodded eagerly despite his discomfort. "Yes'm. My pa wanted me to work his farm in Kansas, but I heard stories about the big cattle drives and knew that's what I wanted. Saved up for 2 years to buy my gear and horse." "Your father wasn't happy, I imagine." "No, he wasn't." Billy's expression grew serious. "Said I was throwing my life away on foolish dreams. But Mr. Dawson gave me a chance when no one else would. Said he saw something in me worth believing in." Abigail finished her work in thoughtful silence. As she was leaving the wagon, Hank approached, his silhouette outlined against the setting sun. "How's our patient?" "Healing well," she replied. "He'll be back in the saddle in a few days if he's careful." Hank nodded, seemingly relieved. "Good. We need every hand." He hesitated, then added, "Would you walk with me a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss." Curious, Abigail fell into step beside him as they moved away from the camp toward a small rise overlooking their position. The evening was cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "We've been on the trail nearly a week," Hank began, "and you've proven yourself more capable than most men I've hired. But I can't help wondering what you're running from, Miss Winters." Abigail stiffened. "What makes you think I'm running from anything?" "Experience. People don't usually leave comfort for hardship without good reason." He turned to face her directly. "And I've seen the way you look back sometimes, like you're measuring the distance between you and whatever's behind." The perceptiveness of his observation caught her off guard. For a moment, Abigail considered deflecting with a half-truth again, but something in Hank's steady gaze made her reconsider. "My father has arranged a marriage for me," she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "To a businessman from Boston named Everett Blackwood, a man I've never met." Hank's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. "I see. And you don't wish to marry this man?" "How could I? I know nothing about him except his name and that he has considerable holdings in the railway," she quoted bitterly. "My father sees it as a perfect alliance, Eastern money, Western land. I see it as the end of any choice in my own life." "So the cattle drive is your way of delaying the inevitable?" Abigail sighed, looking out over the darkening landscape. "Or perhaps finding the courage to refuse. My father is not a man accustomed to having his decisions questioned, especially by his daughter." Hank was quiet for a long moment, seemingly weighing his words carefully. "What would you choose if the choice were truly yours?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Abigail found herself staring at Hank's profile, noting the strength in his jaw, the quiet dignity in his bearing despite the dust and wear of the trail. "I would choose a life where I'm valued for more than my family name or the advantages I bring to a merger," she answered finally. "I would choose to be seen." Their eyes met in the fading light, and for a heartbeat, Abigail thought Hank might say something more. Instead, he nodded slowly. "That seems like something worth fighting for, Miss Winters." The moment was broken by shouts from the camp. Dinner was ready. As they walked back, Abigail felt a curious lightness, as if sharing her burden had somehow diminished its weight. The days that followed brought new challenges as the cattle drive pushed deeper into rougher country. They encountered a band of Blackfoot hunters who, after tense negotiations facilitated by one of the cowboys who spoke their language, allowed passage through their hunting grounds in exchange for 3 head of cattle. A sudden thunderstorm scattered a portion of the herd, requiring an exhausting day of tracking and retrieving the strays. Through it all, Abigail worked alongside the men, earning their respect not through her status as the owner's daughter, but through her willingness to endure the same hardships without complaint. And through it all, her awareness of Hank Dawson grew. She noticed the quiet authority with which he led, making decisions that balanced the welfare of men, animals, and mission. She observed his patience with younger cowboys, teaching rather than berating when mistakes were made. Most of all, she recognized in him a fundamental decency that stood in stark contrast to the cold business arrangement her father had made for her future. 2 weeks into the journey, they made camp near a small town, the first signs of civilization since leaving the ranch. Most of the cowboys headed straight for the saloon, eager for whiskey and company after the isolation of the trail. Hank assigned a skeleton crew to watch the herd and promised the others they could switch out after a few hours. "Will you be joining the men in town?" Abigail asked as they unsaddled their horses. Hank shook his head. "Someone needs to keep a clear head. These small towns can spell trouble for a cattle drive, locals looking to make easy money, card sharps targeting cowboys, with weeks of pay burning holes in their pockets." "Then I'll stay as well," Abigail decided. "I've had enough dust in my hair without adding saloon smoke." They shared a simple dinner by a small fire away from the main camp, the conversation flowing more easily than it had before. Hank spoke of his childhood in Texas, his first cattle drive at 16, the years working his way up from rookie to trail boss. Abigail shared stories of growing up on the Montana frontier, her mother's quiet strength before illness took her 3 years prior, her complicated relationship with her ambitious father. "He wasn't always so driven by status," she explained, staring into the flames. "When my mother was alive, he seemed content with what they had built together. After she died, it was as if he needed to fill the emptiness with something tangible: money, connections, influence." "Grief changes people," Hank observed quietly. "Some turn inward, others reach outward for whatever they can grasp." "Did you lose someone?" The question slipped out before Abigail could consider its propriety. Hank was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he nodded once. "My wife and son. Influenza, 6 years ago." The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, hit Abigail with unexpected force. "I'm so sorry. It was a bad winter. Half the county took sick." By the time I got back from a drive, they were already gone. His voice remained steady, but his hands tightened around his coffee cup. That's when I started taking longer drives, going further. The trail became home because the actual home held too many ghosts. Impulsively, Abigail reached across and placed her hand over his. "Thank you for telling me." Hank looked down at their hands, then up at her face, something vulnerable and questioning in his expression. For a moment, Abigail thought he might pull away, but instead, he slowly turned his hand to clasp hers. "You're easy to talk to, Abigail," he said, using her given name for the first time. Too easy, perhaps. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Abigail was acutely aware of the roughness of his palm against hers, the flicker of firelight across his features, the way his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. The spell was broken by shouting from the direction of town. Hank released her hand immediately, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. Trouble. They hurried toward the commotion to find several of their cowboys engaged in a brawl with local men outside the saloon. Accusations of cheating at cards had escalated into flying fists and broken furniture. Hank waded into the fray without hesitation, physically separating combatants and issuing sharp commands that cut through the chaos. Abigail stayed back, but helped tend to those with bloody noses and split lips as they were extracted from the fight. It took nearly an hour to restore order, pay for damages, and get their men back to camp. By then, the intimate moment by the fire seemed a distant memory, replaced by the practical concerns of keeping the drive on schedule despite several cowboys nursing injuries. "We leave at first light," Hank announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Anyone too hungover or beat up to ride can follow in the supply wagon until they're fit." As the men dispersed to their bedrolls, grumbling but obedient, Hank approached Abigail. "You should get some rest too. Tomorrow will be a hard day." She nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the long day. "Hank, about what you told me, it was a long time ago," he interrupted gently. "And perhaps not something I should have burdened you with." "It wasn't a burden," Abigail insisted. "It was a trust." Something softened in his expression. "Then I thank you for honoring it." He hesitated, then added, "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Hank." As she settled into her bedroll that night, Abigail found herself thinking not of Everett Blackwood or her father's plans, but of a quiet conversation by firelight and the feeling of a calloused hand holding hers. For the first time since receiving her father's letter, the future seemed not a sentence to be endured but a question still unanswered. The next morning brought unexpected challenges. 3 of their best hands were too injured from the fight to ride effectively, and a sudden illness likely from bad whiskey had laid low 2 more. With the herd growing restless and a mountain pass ahead, Hank was forced to redistribute responsibilities among the remaining cowboys. "Abigail," he said, approaching her as she saddled Penny, "I need your help today more than ever. Can you ride flank position? Jake will show you what to do." She nodded without hesitation. "Whatever you need." The day proved grueling as they navigated the cattle through increasingly difficult terrain. Abigail worked tirelessly, following Jake's instructions to keep strays from wandering off the trail and helping push the reluctant animals forward when they balked at steep sections. By midday, her muscles ached and dust coated her throat, but a fierce satisfaction burned within her at being truly useful, truly necessary. Late afternoon brought them to the most challenging section, yet a narrow pass between towering rock faces, barely wide enough for the cattle to move through in groups of 3 or 4. Progress slowed to a crawl as cowboys positioned themselves along the passage, ensuring the animals kept moving without panic. Abigail was stationed near the entrance to the pass when she noticed a young cow and her calf separated from the main herd, drifting toward a steep ravine to the south. Without thinking, she turned Penny and rode after them, determined to prevent their loss. The cow proved stubborn, constantly veering away from Abigail's attempts to guide it back. The pursuit led her farther from the main drive, around an outcropping that soon blocked her view of the pass. Just as she finally managed to turn the animals, a sound froze her blood, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. "Well now, what have we here?" came a gravelly voice. A lady cowboy, all alone with 2 prime beeves. Abigail turned slowly to find 3 men on horseback watching her with predatory interest. Their clothes were trail-worn, but their weapons gleamed with care. Professional rustlers. Then, not opportunistic thieves. "These cattle belong to the Winters Drive," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "My companions are just beyond that ridge." The leader, a gaunt man with a puckered scar running down one cheek, laughed. "Nice try, miss. We've been watching. You're a good half-mile from anyone who might help you." Abigail's hand inched toward the small revolver in her saddlebag, a precaution her father had insisted upon for the ranch, though she'd rarely had cause to use it. "I wouldn't," warned another rustler, younger but with cold eyes that had seen too much violence. "Even if you got one of us, the other two would make you regret it." "What do you want?" Abigail asked, though she knew the answer all too well. "Just the cattle," said the scarred man. "Though finding you out here all prettied up despite the trail dust makes me think we might have found something more valuable than beef." Fear twisted in Abigail's stomach, but she forced herself to appear calmer than she felt. "Take the cow and calf if you must, but you'd be wise to leave immediately. The trail boss doesn't take kindly to rustlers." The three men exchanged amused glances. "The trail boss, is it? And who might that be?" "Hank Dawson." The name had an unexpected effect. The scarred man's smirk faltered, and the third rustler, silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Dawson? The same one who tracked the Jenkins gang for 2 weeks before stringing them up?" Abigail had no idea if the story was true, but she seized the advantage. "The very same. And he'll be looking for me any minute now." The men seemed less certain now, glancing toward the ridge as if expecting Hank to appear at any moment. The scarred leader made a quick decision. "Take the cow and calf. Leave the woman, she's not worth the trouble Dawson would bring." As they moved to round up the animals, a shot rang out, echoing off the rocks. All eyes turned to see Hank Dawson atop the ridge, rifle raised to his shoulder. "Next one won't be a warning," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Behind him appeared Jake and 2 other cowboys, all armed and grim-faced. The rustlers weighed their options visibly, 3 against 4, with the element of surprise now lost. After a tense moment, the leader raised his hand slightly. "No harm done, Dawson. Just having a friendly chat with the lady. Right out. Now." Hank's voice was cold as steel, and spread the word the Winters heard is off limits. With muttered curses, the rustlers turned their horses and rode away, empty-handed. Only when they had disappeared into the distance did Hank and the others descend to join Abigail. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No, I'm fine. They didn't touch me." Abigail was dismayed to find her voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "How did you find me?" "Missed you at the pass count," Hank explained, his relief evident beneath his controlled exterior. "When Jake said he'd seen you chasing strays this direction, I knew something was wrong. I shouldn't have gone after them alone," Abigail admitted. "It was foolish." "It was brave," Hank corrected, surprising her. "Foolish too, perhaps, but mostly brave. You didn't abandon your responsibility, even at risk to yourself." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're becoming a real drover, Abigail Winters." As they rounded up the cow and calf to rejoin the herd, Abigail felt a curious warmth spreading through her chest despite the lingering fear. Not just from Hank's unexpected praise, but from the realization that somewhere along this journey, she had begun to transform from Judge Winters's dutiful daughter into a woman who made her own choices and faced their consequences. That evening, as they made camp beyond the mountain pass, word of the encounter with rustlers spread quickly among the men. Abigail found herself the recipient of newfound respect, with cowboys tipping their hats as they passed, and making sure she received the first cup of coffee from the pot. "Seems you've been properly initiated now," Jake told her with a grin. "Ain't official until you've stared down the wrong end of a gun." After dinner, Hank drew her aside, his expression serious. "We need to talk about what happened today." They walked to the edge of camp, finding privacy beneath a towering pine. The evening was cool, with stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Those men recognized my name," Hank said without preamble. "That means they're part of a larger operation, not just opportunistic thieves. We need to be more vigilant the rest of the way to Cheyenne." "Will they come back?" "Not likely. Not for just 2,000 head with armed drovers watching. But they'll talk. and others might decide the risk is worth the reward. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I don't like that they saw you. That complicates things. Abigail understood his meaning immediately. You think they might target me specifically? You're a woman traveling with a cattle drive. That makes you unusual, noticeable. And some men might see you as leverage. His jaw tightened. From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. Not to gather firewood, not to check on strays, not even to handle personal matters. You take someone with you, understand? The directive should have felt controlling, even patronizing, but Abigail recognized it for what it was: genuine concern for her safety. I understand. Hank studied her face in the gathering darkness. I shouldn't have let you come on this drive. You couldn't have stopped me. Abigail reminded him with a small smile. No, I suppose not. His expression softened slightly. You're a stubborn woman, Abigail Winters. So my father frequently reminds me. At the mention of her father, something shifted in Hank's demeanor. How much longer will you delay the inevitable? Cheyenne is less than 2 weeks away. After that, the unfinished sentence hung between them, heavy with implication. After that, she would return to the ranch. After that, Everett Blackwood would arrive to claim his bride. After that, whatever had begun to grow between her and Hank would wither before it could fully bloom. I don't know, Abigail admitted softly. I've been avoiding thinking about it. Hank nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. What do you want, Abigail? Not what your father wants for you. Not what society expects. What do you want? The question echoed their earlier conversation, but now it carried greater weight, demanded a more honest answer. Abigail found herself stepping closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. I want to choose my own path, she whispered. My own companion for the journey. Something flickered in Hank's expression, longing, quickly mastered. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected tenderness. Some choices come with high prices. All the important ones do. For a moment, Abigail thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she felt herself leaning toward him almost unconsciously. But then he stepped back, creating distance between them. We should get back to camp, he said, his voice rougher than before. Early start tomorrow. As they walked back in silence, Abigail wondered if she had misread him, misread the situation entirely. But the memory of his touch lingered on her skin, and she knew with certainty that whatever lay between them was not imagined, merely complicated by circumstances neither had chosen. The following days brought increasing challenges as they pushed the herd through difficult terrain. Heavy rain turned trails to mud, slowing their progress and making the cattle restive. A wolf pack followed them for 2 days, picking off stragglers when vigilance lapsed. Through it all, Hank maintained his distance from Abigail, unfailingly polite, even kind, but never again allowing the intimacy they had briefly shared. Yet Abigail caught him watching her sometimes, when he thought her attention was elsewhere. She recognized in his gaze the same conflict. She felt attraction warring with practicality, desire with duty. 10 days out from Cheyenne, disaster struck. They were crossing a narrow stream when thunder rumbled in the distance. The cattle, already nervous from the crossing, began to shift uneasily. Hank ordered the men to spread out, to keep the animals calm and moving forward. Storm's moving this way fast, Jake called, pointing to dark clouds rapidly approaching from the west. Might turn nasty. Before Hank could respond, lightning split the sky directly overhead, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. The effect on the herd was immediate and catastrophic. Panicked bellows filled the air as the cattle turned and began to run, trampling those that fell in their path. Stampede. Hank shouted above the din, ride wide. Don't get caught in front of them. Abigail, positioned near the rear of the herd, watched in horror as the mass of animals transformed from an orderly procession into a chaotic, deadly force. Cowboys raced alongside, trying desperately to turn the leaders, to guide the stampede in a circle that would eventually slow its momentum. Rain began to fall in sheets, reducing visibility and making the ground treacherous. Abigail urged Penny forward, determined to help where she could. She spotted Billy, still not fully recovered from his injury, struggling to keep pace with the stampede's edge. Without thinking, she rode toward him, shouting over the thunder and pounding hooves. "Billy, fall back. You're too close." The young cowboy turned at her voice, momentary distraction proving fatal. His horse stumbled in the mud, throwing Billy directly into the path of the charging cattle. Abigail watched in horror as he disappeared beneath the hooves. "No," she screamed, pushing Penny closer despite the danger. Rain stung her eyes as she searched desperately for any sign of the young man. Suddenly Hank was beside her, his face grim as he grabbed Penny's bridle. "Get back. There's nothing you can do for him now. We have to try." Abigail fought against his grip, nearly sobbing with frustration and fear. "Not at the cost of your life, too." Hank's voice cut through her panic. "Ride back to the stream crossing. Help the injured there." "That's an order, Abigail." The authority in his voice penetrated her desperation. Nodding jerkily, she turned Penny away from the stampede, her heart heavy with the knowledge that Billy was almost certainly dead or dying. The next hours passed in a blur of rain, mud, and frantic activity. The stampede eventually exhausted itself against a rocky hillside, nearly 3 miles from where it began. The toll was devastating: dozens of cattle dead or injured beyond recovery, equipment scattered and destroyed, and worst of all, 2 cowboys missing, including Billy. Search parties were organized as soon as the rain slackened. Abigail joined one despite Hank's initial objections, refusing to remain behind while others risked themselves. They found the first missing cowboy, Tomas, with a broken leg but otherwise alive, sheltering beneath an overturned wagon that had been carried by the stampede's force. Billy's body was discovered an hour later, broken and still. Abigail watched numbly as they wrapped him in a blanket, her mind replaying the moment she had called out to him, wondering if her warning had actually caused his death rather than prevented it. That night, camp was somber. The men dug a grave for Billy by lantern light, no one speaking beyond what was necessary for the task. When they gathered for the brief funeral, Hank stepped forward, hat in hand. Billy Mason was 19 years old, he said, his voice carrying in the still night air. This was his first drive, but he rode like a man born to the saddle. He died doing what he loved, and we'll remember him for his smile as much as his skill. Simple words for a simple ceremony, yet Abigail found tears streaming down her face. Not just for Billy, but for the harsh realities of this life. She had temporarily embraced its beauty and its brutality existing side by side, inseparable as shadow and light. After the other men dispersed, Abigail remained by the grave, unable to shake her sense of responsibility. That was where Hank found her, standing alone beneath stars now visible after the storm's passage. "It wasn't your fault," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I called out to him. He turned because of me. He turned because that's what people do when they hear their name." Hank's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "The stampede killed him, Abigail. Not you." She turned to him, seeking comfort she wasn't sure he could provide. "How do you bear it?" "The responsibility for all these lives. One day at a time." His free hand came up to brush tears from her cheek. "And by remembering that each man here chose this life, knowing its risks. Like I chose to come on this drive," Abigail whispered. "Yes, choices have consequences, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrible." His eyes held hers, serious in the starlight. "But there still are choices to make." In that moment, standing beside a fresh grave with the taste of loss bitter on her tongue, Abigail made another choice. She stepped forward and pressed her lips to Hank's, a kiss born of grief and need, and something deeper that had been growing between them since that first meeting in her father's study. For an instant, Hank remained still, surprised by her boldness. Then his arms encircled her, pulling her against him as he returned the kiss with an intensity that stole her breath. His lips were warm despite the night's chill, firm yet gentle as they moved against hers. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "Abigail, this complicates things. I know." She clutched the front of his shirt, unwilling to release him just yet. "But tonight, I don't care about complications. I just need." "What?" he asked softly. "What do you need?" "You," she answered simply. "Just you." He closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "There's still your father. Your arranged marriage. Tomorrow I'll worry about my father's plans. Tonight belongs to us." Hank studied her face in the moonlight, searching for uncertainty or fear. Finding none, he nodded once, decision made. Taking her hand, he led her away from the grave toward his small tent at the edge of camp. Inside, by the soft glow of a lantern turned low, they came together with a tenderness that belied the urgency of their desire. Clothing was removed slowly, reverently, each new expanse of skin explored with wondering fingers and lips. For Abigail, whose knowledge of physical love came only from whispered conversations with married friends, each sensation was a revelation: the heat of Hank's skin against hers, the strength in his hands as they traced the curves of her body, the intoxicating weight of him as he covered her with his own body. He was patient, careful of her inexperience, guiding her through momentary discomfort to pleasure she had never imagined possible. In his arms, Abigail found not just physical fulfillment, but a sense of belonging, of rightness, that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Abigail listened to the steady beat of his heart and knew with absolute certainty that she could never marry Everett Blackwood. Whatever the cost, whatever her father's reaction, she would not surrender this newfound understanding of what love could be. "What are you thinking?" Hank asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I've made my choice," she replied softly, "and there's no going back." He tightened his arms around her. "Are you certain? The path forward won't be easy." "I'm certain of how I feel. The rest," she sighed, "the rest we'll figure out together, if that's what you want." Hank shifted, propping himself up to look into her eyes. "What I want is you, Abigail Winters. I've known it since that day by the river when you looked to me instead of the water. But wanting isn't enough in this world. There are realities we can't ignore. Such as, I'm a trail boss. I have no land, no permanent home. What I earn goes mostly to my sister's family back in Texas. Her husband was killed at Shiloh, leaving her with 3 children to raise." His expression was serious, almost stern. "I can't offer you the life you're accustomed to." Abigail reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. "I'm not asking for luxury, Hank. I'm asking for partnership, for the freedom to choose my own happiness. And if that choice costs you your relationship with your father, your inheritance, the security you've known all your life, then that's the price," she said simply, "and I'll pay it willingly." Hank searched her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "When we reach Cheyenne, we'll face whatever comes together. But until then, we need to be discreet. The men respect you. I won't have that compromised." Abigail agreed, understanding the wisdom in his caution. They spent one more precious hour in each other's arms before she slipped back to her own bedroll, her body pleasantly sore and her heart lighter than it had been in months, despite the day's tragedy. The final days of the drive passed in a curious mixture of heightened awareness and forced normalcy. By day, Abigail and Hank maintained their respective roles, their interactions professional and appropriate. But stolen glances conveyed what words could not, and occasionally their hands would brush as they rode side by side, the brief contact sending electricity through Abigail's body. By night, after the camp had settled, they would find moments of privacy, sometimes just to talk, sharing histories and hopes, building the foundation of understanding that would support whatever future they might forge together. Other times, they would come together physically, each encounter deepening Abigail's certainty that she had found something rare and precious, something worth fighting for. As they approached Cheyenne, reality began to intrude on their fragile happiness. Abigail knew she would need to return to the ranch, to confront her father and break the engagement he had arranged. Hank would need to complete his business in Cheyenne, selling the cattle, paying the men, settling accounts before he could join her. They would be separated, and in that separation lay danger. "Come with me to the ranch," Abigail suggested the night before they were due to reach Cheyenne. "Face my father together." Hank shook his head regretfully. "I have responsibilities here that can't be abandoned. The men need to be paid, the accounts settled. Your father hired me to see this drive through to completion, and I won't leave that duty unfulfilled. Then I'll wait for you in Cheyenne." "No." His voice was firm. "You need to return to the ranch immediately. Your father's letter said this Blackwood would arrive 2 weeks after you received it. That time is almost upon us." Abigail hadn't considered the timing, and the realization sent a chill through her. You're right. I need to be there before he arrives. I'll follow as soon as my business here is concluded. 3 days, for at most. Hank took her hands in his. Can you hold your ground that long? I've held it for nearly 3 weeks on the trail. Abigail reminded him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I can hold it a few more days at home. They reached Cheyenne the following afternoon, the cattle drive completed successfully despite its losses. The stockyards were busy with buyers and sellers, and Hank was immediately pulled into negotiations while Abigail arranged for her return journey. Their farewell was necessarily brief and public, a handshake, words of appreciation for her assistance that anyone might offer a valued colleague. But Hank's eyes conveyed what his words could not, and when he pressed something into her palm as they shook hands, Abigail understood it was a token of his promise. Only later, aboard the stagecoach heading north, did she examine the small object, a polished stone, smoothed by water, with bands of color running through it like a sunset captured in rock. My lucky stone, read the note wrapped around it. Carried it since my first drive. Now it carries my promise to you. Wait for me. Abigail clutched the stone tightly as the stagecoach jolted over rough roads, drawing her ever closer to the confrontation that would determine her future. The journey that had begun as an escape now became a return with purpose, not to submit to her father's will, but to claim her right to choose her own path. The Winters ranch came into view late on the second day, its familiar buildings both welcoming and intimidating after her weeks away. As the hired buggy from town carried her up the long drive, Abigail steeled herself for what was to come. Her father's carriage was parked before the house he had returned from Denver. Then, whether Everett Blackwood had already arrived remained to be seen. Martha met her at the door, eyes wide with relief and concern. Miss Abigail, thank heavens you're back safely. Your father has been beside himself with worry. Has he? Abigail couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice as she removed her travel-stained hat and gloves. Indeed I have, came her father's voice from the study doorway. Judge Thomas Winters stood tall and imposing, his silver hair and beard neatly trimmed, his expression a mixture of anger and relief. Where in God's name have you been, Abigail? Your aunt's letter said only that you had gone on an extended ride and would return before my arrival. Abigail met his gaze steadily. I accompanied the cattle drive to Cheyenne, father. For a moment, he seemed not to comprehend her words. Then his face darkened with anger. You did what? Have you taken leave of your senses? A cattle drive is no place for a woman of your station. Yet I not only survived, but thrived. Abigail replied calmly. Mr. Dawson said I was an asset to the drive. Dawson, her father repeated, the name clearly registering. The trail boss. He permitted this madness. He recognized I am an adult capable of making my own decisions. Abigail straightened her shoulders. As I hope you will, father. Thomas Winters studied his daughter, noting the changes in her, the sun-darkened skin, the confident posture, the unwavering gaze that met his without flinching. Something in his expression shifted from anger to wary respect. We will discuss this further after you've bathed and changed, he said finally. You look as though you've been dragged through every mud hole between here and Cheyenne. Nearly, Abigail agreed with a small smile. I'll join you in the study in 1 hour. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Abigail felt a curious sense of calm. The dreaded confrontation had begun, and she had held her ground. The hardest part was yet to come, but she carried Hank's stone in her pocket, a tangible reminder that she no longer stood alone. True to her word, 1 hour later Abigail entered her father's study, freshly bathed and dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress that had been her mother's favorite. Her hair was arranged in a neat chignon, and she wore the small pearl earrings that had been her mother's final gift before her death. Judge Winters sat behind his desk, a glass of whiskey at his elbow and a stack of papers before him. He looked up as she entered, gesturing to the chair opposite him. You look more like yourself, he observed. Though I dare say your mother would be shocked to see the tan you've acquired. I think Mother would have understood better than you imagine, Abigail replied, taking the indicated seat. She always said conventions were made to guide, not imprison. A flicker of something pain, perhaps, or recognition crossed her father's face at the mention of his late wife. Your mother was an exceptional woman. Yes, she was. and she raised me to be my own person, not an extension of your ambitions. Thomas Winters' eyebrows rose at her directness. I see the cattle drive taught you more than just droving skills. It's made you impertinent as well. Not impertinent, father. Honest. Abigail leaned forward slightly. I received your letter about Mr. Blackwood before I left. That's why I joined the drive, to gain perspective before being forced into a marriage with a stranger. Forced? Her father's voice hardened. I have arranged an advantageous match with a respected businessman who can secure our family's future. Many young women would be grateful for such an opportunity. Then find one of them to marry him. Abigail replied evenly. Because I will not. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of her defiance. Thomas Winters studied his daughter with narrowed eyes, searching for weakness or uncertainty. Finding none, he sighed heavily. This is about more than just refusing an arrangement, isn't it? He asked finally. Something happened on that cattle drive. Abigail considered lying, then decided truth was the only path forward. I met someone. Someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. The trail boss, her father said flatly. Dawson. She nodded. Yes. And you believe you love this man after a few weeks in his company? A man who owns nothing but his saddle and gun. Scorn crept into his voice. This is precisely why fathers arrange suitable matches for their daughters, to prevent them from being swept away by romantic notions. It's not romantic notion, father. It's respect, understanding, mutual regard. Abigail's voice remained calm despite the anger his dismissal provoked. Hank Dawson saw my worth beyond my family name or the advantages I might bring to a merger. Judge Winters rose from his chair, moving to the window that overlooked the ranch he had built from nothing. For a long moment, he stared out at the land that represented his life's work. Your mother would have sided with you in this, he said finally, his voice softer than before. She always said I was too concerned with status, too driven by ambition. The admission surprised Abigail. She understood you better than anyone. Yes, she did. He turned back to face his daughter. But understanding doesn't mean approval, Abigail. Elizabeth tolerated my ambitions because she loved me, but she never shared them. I had hoped you would see the wisdom in securing our family's future through alliance with Eastern money. There are other ways to secure the future, Abigail pointed out. Ways that don't require sacrificing my happiness. Her father returned to his desk, sitting heavily in his chair. Mr. Blackwood arrives tomorrow. He has traveled a considerable distance at my invitation. At the very least, you owe him the courtesy of meeting him before rejecting his suit. Abigail hadn't expected this compromise. She had prepared for rage, for threats of disinheritance, for emotional manipulation, not for reasonable requests and references to her mother's wisdom. I will meet him, she agreed cautiously. But I will not mislead him about my intentions. Judge Winters nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than approval. And when does your trail boss intend to make his case to me? Within the week. He had business to conclude in Cheyenne. At least he doesn't abandon his responsibilities, her father muttered, almost to himself. That speaks somewhat in his favor. The conversation ended there, neither victory nor defeat for either party, but rather an uneasy truce. As Abigail left the study, she felt both relief that the initial confrontation had gone better than expected and apprehension about what was to come. Her father had not explicitly forbidden her relationship with Hank, but neither had he accepted it. And tomorrow would bring Everett Blackwood, the man who still believed he was to become her husband. That night, Abigail sat at her bedroom window, watching moonlight silver the landscape she had known all her life. She held Hank's stone in her palm, its smooth surface warming against her skin. For the first time, doubt crept into her certainty. Not about her feelings for Hank or her decision to refuse Blackwood, but about the future she and Hank might build together. Her father had spoken truly. Hank owned little beyond his personal possessions. His life was the trail, moving from job to job, place to place. Could she truly adapt to such an existence after a lifetime of stability? And would Hank be happy settling in one place if that's what she wanted? These were questions they had barely begun to explore in their brief time together. Yet as doubt threatened to overwhelm her, Abigail remembered the feeling of Hank's arms around her, the quiet strength in his voice when he spoke of responsibility and choice, the way his eyes had looked when he told her, "What I want is you." Abigail Winters. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together if only she could hold firm through the next few days. Everett Blackwood arrived the following afternoon, his expensive carriage raising dust on the long drive to the ranch house. Abigail watched from her window as a man in his mid-30s descended, impeccably dressed in a suit that marked him immediately as an Easterner. He had handsome features arranged in a pleasant expression, but there was something calculating in his eyes that she could discern even at a distance. Steeling herself, Abigail checked her appearance one final time in the mirror. She had chosen a conservative dress in deep green, her hair arranged simply but elegantly. She wanted to appear dignified and composed, not a wild frontier girl easily dismissed as immature or impulsive. Her father was already greeting Blackwood in the parlor when she descended the stairs. Both men rose as she entered, Blackwood's eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "Miss Winters," he said, stepping forward to take her hand and bow over it with practiced grace. "Your father's descriptions did not do you justice. You are even more lovely than I was led to believe." "Mr. Blackwood," Abigail acknowledged, withdrawing her hand as soon as politeness allowed. "Welcome to our home. I trust your journey was comfortable." "As comfortable as one can expect in these territories," he replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though I confess the accommodations in your local town left much to be desired. Frontier towns prioritize function over luxury," Abigail noted, taking a seat on the sofa. "But they serve their purpose well enough." Judge Winters cleared his throat, a warning in his eyes as he glanced at his daughter. "Everett has been telling me about his latest railway ventures. Quite impressive, I must say." "Indeed." Abigail turned an attentive expression to their guest. "Please, Mr. Blackwood, I'd be interested to hear about your business interests." Whether he detected the insincerity in her tone or not, Blackwood launched into a detailed account of his railway investments, the connections he had cultivated in Washington, and the fortune he had amassed through strategic acquisitions. It was clearly a rehearsed speech, designed to impress a potential father-in-law and intimidate a potential bride with his success and influence. "Of course," he concluded after nearly 20 minutes of self-aggrandizement, "these Western territories represent the future of American expansion. That's why alliances between Eastern capital and Western landholdings are so advantageous for all parties." "Alliances," Abigail repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "An interesting term for marriage, Mr. Blackwood." Her father shot her another warning look, but Blackwood merely smiled, unperturbed. "Business and marriage have always been intertwined among the better classes, Miss Winters. But I assure you, my interest in this particular alliance extends beyond the merely financial." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made Abigail's skin crawl despite its subtlety. There was nothing overtly improper in his gaze, yet she felt suddenly as if she were being appraised, valued, and found acceptable as breeding stock. "How fortunate for me," she replied, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from her voice. Blackwood's smile never faltered, but something hardened in his eyes. "Your father mentioned you have a spirited nature. I find that refreshing after the insipid young ladies of Boston society. Then you should find the West full of refreshing women, Mr. Blackwood. We tend to speak our minds out here." "Abigail," her father interjected sharply, "perhaps you might show Mr. Blackwood the gardens before dinner? The evening is quite pleasant." Recognizing the dismissal, Abigail rose with a tight smile. "Of course, father." Mr. Blackwood, in the gardens, with the pretense of admiring her mother's roses, Blackwood moved closer to Abigail than propriety strictly allowed. "Your father seems eager for us to become better acquainted." "My father has many expectations," Abigail replied, maintaining distance between them by moving to examine a different bloom. "Not all of which I share." Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. "I had understood our arrangement was settled." "My father may have given that impression," Abigail acknowledged, "but I have not yet given my consent to any arrangement." "I see." Blackwood studied her with new interest, as if reassessing a business opportunity with unexpected complications. "May I ask what reservations you harbor?" Abigail considered how direct to be, then decided honesty would serve best. "I don't know you, Mr. Blackwood. More importantly, you don't know me, not my character, my desires, my dreams. You seek a wife to complement your business aspirations, and provide heirs. I seek a partnership based on mutual respect and affection. Affection can grow with time, he suggested smoothly. Many successful marriages begin as practical arrangements, and many are lifelong prisons for women who had no voice in choosing their jailer, Abigail countered. Rather than taking offense, Blackwood laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed his calculating features. You are indeed spirited, Miss Winters. I can see why your father warned me you might present a challenge. Is that how he described me? As a challenge to be overcome? Not in those exact words, Blackwood admitted. But he did mention you might require convincing of the advantages our union would bring. Abigail turned to face him directly. Mr. Blackwood, in the interest of honesty, I should inform you that my heart is already engaged elsewhere. I cannot in good conscience enter into an arrangement with you, regardless of the advantages it might offer. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a cold assessment that reminded Abigail of a card player recalculating odds. I see. And does your father know of this? Prior attachment. He does. Yet he proceeded with our introduction. Blackwood's tone suggested he found this particularly interesting. That suggests he does not consider your attachment significant or suitable. My father and I disagree on what constitutes a suitable match, Abigail replied evenly. But I respect you enough to be forthright about my situation. Blackwood nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I appreciate your candor, Miss Winters, unexpected though it may be. But I did not travel all this way to be dismissed before properly presenting my case. What do you mean? Simply that I intend to remain for the duration of my planned visit 3 days, as agreed with your father. During that time, I hope to demonstrate that a union between us would benefit you as much as it would me. His smile returned, confident and slightly predatory. I can be quite persuasive when motivated. Abigail suppressed a shiver of distaste. You're welcome to try, Mr. Blackwood, but I should warn you that my mind is quite decided. For now, perhaps. He offered his arm with practiced gallantry. Shall we return to the house? I believe dinner will be served soon. The evening that followed was an exercise in strained politeness. Judge Winters dominated the conversation, extolling Blackwood's virtues while pointedly ignoring Abigail's obvious disinterest. Blackwood himself played the perfect guest, charming, attentive, and unfailingly courteous despite Abigail's coolness. By the time she excused herself for the night, Abigail's head ached from maintaining her composure. In the privacy of her room, she clutched Hank's stone like a talisman, willing him to arrive soon. Blackwood's determination to persuade her despite her clear refusal unsettled her more than outright anger would have. There was a calculation to his persistence that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted by whatever means necessary. The following day brought no respite. Blackwood requested a tour of the ranch, skillfully using the opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge of land management and cattle breeding, knowledge clearly acquired recently and specifically to impress Judge Winters. When Abigail attempted to excuse herself from these excursions, her father firmly insisted on her presence. Give him a fair hearing, Abigail, he urged when they had a moment alone. Blackwood is offering you a life of comfort and influence many women would envy. At the cost of my independence and happiness, she countered. Is that truly what you want for your only child, father? A gilded cage. Something in her words seemed to reach him, for he fell silent, his expression troubled. But before he could respond, Blackwood rejoined them, and the moment for honest conversation passed. That evening, as they sat on the veranda after dinner, Blackwood maneuvered to sit beside Abigail, while her father was momentarily called away by the foreman. I've been patient, Miss Winters, he said quietly, his voice carrying only to her ears. But I begin to think you're not taking our potential arrangement seriously enough. On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood, I take it very seriously indeed. That's why I cannot agree to it. His fingers closed around her wrist, not painfully, but with unmistakable pressure. Your father has already accepted my proposal. Contracts have been discussed. My business associates in Boston are expecting announcements upon my return. Abigail tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Unhand me, sir. Listen carefully. He continued as if she hadn't spoken. I came west seeking land and connections. Your father offers both through you. I intend to leave with what I came for. And if I refuse? Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. Your father's position as judge relies heavily on political appointments and connections I have significant influence over. It would be unfortunate if his career were to suffer because his daughter was too stubborn to see reason. Abigail stared at him, cold anger replacing her initial fear. Are you threatening my father's position if I don't agree to marry you? I prefer to think of it as clarifying the stakes. He released her wrist at last. Consider carefully, Miss Winters. Your choice affects more than just your own future. Before she could respond, Judge Winters returned, and Blackwood smoothly shifted to discussing the next day's planned hunting excursion as if nothing untoward had occurred. That night, Abigail paced her room in agitation. Blackwood's threat changed everything. She had been prepared to defy her father for the sake of her own happiness, but could she do so knowing it might destroy his career, his standing in the community? The thought of Hank arriving to find her wavering in her resolve filled her with shame, yet she couldn't dismiss Blackwood's warning as empty. Dawn brought no clarity, only the certainty that she could not face another day of Blackwood's subtle intimidation without support. After a nearly sleepless night, Abigail dressed early and slipped out to the stables before the household was fully awake. If she couldn't bring Hank to her immediately, she would at least find solace in a morning ride to clear her thoughts. The stable boy had just finished saddling Penny when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Abigail's attention. Her heart leaped as she recognized the rider Hank, arriving 2 days earlier than expected, his face drawn with fatigue but lighting with joy when he spotted her. Abigail, he called, dismounting in a fluid motion despite his obvious exhaustion. I rode straight through once the business was settled. Couldn't bear to be away from you another day. She flew into his arms without hesitation, propriety forgotten in the relief of his presence. Thank God you're here. I was beginning to think what? He asked, pulling back to study her face with concern. What's happened? Before she could answer, a cold voice interrupted from the stable entrance. Well, this explains a great deal. Everett Blackwood stood watching them, his expression a mixture of anger and calculation. Behind him, Judge Winters appeared, his face darkening as he took in the scene. Dawson, he acknowledged stiffly. I see you've completed the drive successfully. Judge Winters, Hank replied with equal formality, though he kept one arm protectively around Abigail's waist. I have. The cattle fetched a good price, and your share of the profits is substantial. How convenient that you've returned in time to interrupt my guest's visit. The judge's tone made it clear he suspected the timing was deliberate. Father, Abigail began, but Blackwood cut her off. So this is your prior attachment, he said, addressing Abigail, but looking Hank up and down with undisguised contempt. A saddle tramp. How disappointingly predictable. Hank's body tensed beside her, but his voice remained steady. Mr. Blackwood, I presume. I understand you've come with expectations regarding Abigail. I'm afraid those expectations will not be met. That remains to be seen, Blackwood replied coldly. Judge Winters and I have an understanding that predates whatever dalliance you may have enjoyed on the trail. Enough, Judge Winters interrupted. This is hardly the place for such a discussion. Dawson, you'll join us for breakfast. We have much to discuss, including your intentions toward my daughter. The tension around the breakfast table was palpable. Martha served the meal with worried glances at each face, clearly sensing the storm brewing beneath the surface politeness. Hank had been given time to wash the trail dust from his face and hands, but still looked out of place in the formal dining room, his trail clothes a stark contrast to Blackwood's tailored suit. I understand you've been driving cattle for some years, Mr. Dawson. Blackwood began with false cordiality. A respectable occupation, if somewhat itinerant. It suits me, Hank replied simply, though I've been considering more permanent arrangements recently. His eyes met Abigail's briefly, conveying a silent message of support and determination. She felt her courage strengthening under his gaze. Indeed, Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. And what might those arrangements entail? Hank set down his coffee cup deliberately. With your permission, sir, I'd like to speak with you privately after breakfast. There are matters best discussed between men. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. My study, half an hour from now. Blackwood's expression hardened. I should think any discussion regarding Miss Winters would include all interested parties. You'll have your chance to speak, Blackwood, Judge Winters assured him. But I'll hear Dawson out first, as is my right as Abigail's father. The remainder of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. As they rose from the table, Hank managed to brush his hand against Abigail's, a fleeting touch that nevertheless communicated volumes. She squeezed his fingers briefly in response, drawing strength from the connection. The half hour of waiting felt interminable. Abigail retreated to the parlor, nominally to entertain Blackwood, but in reality to keep him from interfering in the conversation between Hank and her father. To her surprise, Blackwood made no attempt at further threats or persuasion, instead watching her with calculating eyes as if reassessing a situation that had suddenly become more complex. When her father finally summoned her to the study, Abigail entered to find Hank standing by the window, his posture tense but determined. Judge Winters sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Abigail," her father instructed. "Mr. Dawson has made me an interesting proposition." She took the indicated chair, her heart racing. "What sort of proposition?" "It seems he wishes to marry you," Judge Winters said, his tone neutral. "He has also expressed interest in purchasing a parcel of our northern grazing land to establish his own ranch." Abigail looked to Hank in surprise. This was new information. They had discussed marriage in abstract terms, but not specific plans for their future. "I've saved most of what I've earned these past 6 years," Hank explained, meeting her questioning gaze. "Enough for a modest start. Your father's land borders good water access, and I know the territory well." "You never mentioned this," Abigail said softly. "I wanted to be certain of your feelings before presuming to make plans," he replied. "And I wanted to approach your father with more than just words to show him I can provide for you properly." Judge Winters cleared his throat. "I've not given my answer yet. There's still the matter of my arrangement with Blackwood to consider." "Father," Abigail began, but he held up a hand to silence her. "However," he continued, "I find myself reminded of something your mother once told me. She said the measure of a parent's love is not how well they control their child's life, but how well they prepare their child to control their own." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxing of the stern mouth. "I have always believed I knew what was best for you, Abigail. Perhaps it's time I trusted that I raised you well enough to know your own mind." Hope blossomed in Abigail's chest. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I will consider Dawson's proposal," her father interrupted. "And I will release you from any obligation to Blackwood, should that be your wish." "It is," Abigail confirmed without hesitation. "Thank you, father." Judge Winters nodded once, then fixed Hank with a stern gaze. "You understand that my daughter has been raised with certain expectations of comfort and security. Can you truly provide those?" "Not immediately to the standard she's known here," Hank admitted honestly. "But I'm a hard worker with experience and determination. What we build may start modestly, but it will be ours, hers, and mine together. And if she changes her mind? If the reality of ranch life without servants and fine things proves harder than the romantic notion, then I would release her from any promise," Hank said simply. "I want Abigail's happiness above all else. If that happiness eventually lies elsewhere, I wouldn't hold her against her will." The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "A fair answer. Better than many men of good breeding would give." He turned to Abigail. "And you, daughter? Are you prepared for the challenges such a life would bring?" "I've just spent nearly a month on a cattle drive, father," she reminded him with a small smile. "I believe I've had a taste of those challenges already, and I found I preferred them to the gilded constraints of the life you had planned for me." Judge Winters sighed heavily, a sound of resignation rather than anger. "Very well. I will inform Blackwood that our arrangement is terminated." He fixed Hank with another stern look. "And I will consider your offer for the northern parcel. At a fair price, no favors on account of my daughter." "I would expect nothing less, sir," Hank agreed. The confrontation with Blackwood proved less dramatic than Abigail had feared. Whether from pride or pragmatism, he accepted Judge Winters' decision with cold dignity, though his parting words to Abigail carried a veiled warning. "You've made your choice, Miss Winters. I hope you never have cause to regret it." His eyes flicked dismissively toward Hank. Some dreams of freedom proved to be merely different forms of constraint. "I'll take my chances, Mr. Blackwood," Abigail replied evenly. Safe travels back to Boston. His departure left an atmosphere of tentative peace over the ranch. Judge Winters, having made his decision, seemed determined to accept it with good grace. He spent several hours with Hank, touring the northern parcel and discussing terms for its sale. By evening, they had reached an agreement that satisfied both men's sense of fair dealing. That night, alone in the garden where her mother's roses still bloomed in the late summer air, Abigail found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she had been a dutiful daughter facing a future chosen by others. Now she stood on the threshold of a life she had chosen for herself, a life that would bring challenges and hardships alongside its joys, but one entirely her own. Hank found her there, moonlight silvering her hair as she bent to inhale the fragrance of a late-blooming rose. He approached quietly, but she sensed his presence and turned with a smile that illuminated her face more brightly than any lamp could. "Your father is a fair businessman," Hank said, coming to stand beside her. "Tough but honest. I respect that. He respects you too, though he'd be slow to admit it." Abigail reached for his hand. "He told me you drive a harder bargain than most bankers he's dealt with." Hank chuckled. High praise indeed from Judge Winters. His expression grew serious. "Are you certain about this, Abigail? About us? It won't be easy at first. Building a ranch from scratch takes time and endless work." "I'm certain about you," she replied simply. "The rest we'll figure out together." She stepped closer, resting her head against his chest. "When I received my father's letter about Blackwood, I felt as if my life was ending. Now I feel it's just beginning." Hank's arms encircled her, strong and sure. "I never expected to find love again after Sarah died. Thought that part of my life was finished." His voice roughened with emotion. "Then you walked into that study, all prim and proper, but with fire in your eyes, and something inside me woke up." "I'm glad it did," Abigail whispered, lifting her face to his. "Because you woke something in me too, the courage to choose my own path." His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they separated, Hank reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "I got this in Cheyenne," he explained. "It's plain, not fancy like you deserve, but it's perfect." Abigail interrupted, her eyes shining with unshed tears as he slipped it onto her finger. "Because it's from you. I love you, Abigail Winters," Hank said, the words simple but profound in the quiet garden. "Not for your father's land or your family name, but for your spirit, your courage, your heart." "And I love you, Hank Dawson," she replied. "Not despite the life you can offer me, but because of it, because it's a life we'll build together, as equals." In that moment, under the vast Montana sky with stars scattered like diamonds above them, Abigail knew she had made the right choice. The path ahead might not be easy, but it would be theirs, chosen freely, walked together. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Abigail stood on the porch of the small but sturdy cabin she now called home. The northern parcel of her father's ranch had proven ideal for their purposes, good grazing land with reliable water access, close enough to the main Winters ranch for occasional visits, but far enough to establish their independence. The winter had been challenging, with storms that tested the cabin's construction and their own resolve. But they had emerged stronger for the trials, their partnership deepening as they faced each challenge together. Hank had proven as capable a rancher as he had been a trail boss, and Abigail had discovered reserves of strength and practical skill she hadn't known she possessed. Now spring had come to their valley, bringing new grass for their small but growing herd and new possibilities for the future. Abigail watched as Hank worked with a young colt in the corral, his movements patient and gentle despite the animal's spirited resistance. The sight of him, her husband of 5 months, now still brought a rush of warmth to her heart. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled, that special smile he reserved only for her. He secured the colt before walking to join her on the porch, removing his hat as he approached. "Something on your mind?" he asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "Just thinking about choices," Abigail replied, accepting his brief kiss. "And how one decision can change everything." Hank's arm slid around her waist, his hand coming to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "Having second thoughts?" "Not one," she assured him, covering his hand with her own. They had only confirmed the pregnancy 2 weeks ago, and the news had brought a joy to Hank's face that had erased years from his appearance. I was thinking about my father's letter, actually. How something that seemed so terrible at the time led me to the greatest happiness I've known. Life has a way of working out, Hank agreed. Not always as we plan, but often as it should. Abigail leaned into his embrace, savoring the strength and tenderness she found there. Do you know what I cherish most about our life here? What's that? That every morning when I wake up, I know I'm exactly where I chose to be, she said softly. With exactly who I chose to love. Hank's arms tightened around her. I choose you every day, Abigail Dawson. And I'll keep choosing you for all the days we have. As they stood together, watching the sun rise higher over their land, their future, Abigail reflected on the question Hank had asked her that night by the campfire, the question that had changed the course of her life. What would you choose if the choice were truly yours? Her answer then had been abstract, a dream of being valued and seen. Now she lived that answer every day, in a life built on mutual respect and love, a life that was truly her own choice. And as the child grew within her a new life that would know only the freedom of chosen paths, never the constraints of others' expectations, Abigail silently thanked her younger self for the courage to say no to the future others had planned, and yes to the one she had found on her own.